Percy, one of my favorite characters to model from Thomas & Friends. And you'd be forgiven for thinking the small 040 green engine you saw in my last layout update was destined to be that. Yet another take on Percy. Or is it? Well, today, ladies and gentlemen, I'm happy to reveal a sort of OC I've developed over the past little bit, which I've named Athena. Definitely still in the Percy family, but not specifically. Off the bat, I'm sure you can tell this is a pretty heavy-ish Pugbash. She's a Hornby pug that was heavily modified and cut down, put on a Pachman Bill chassis that was also heavily modified and cut down. And today I thought it'd be fun to explain how I made her, being not only my first real Pugbash, but freelance design, I guess, as well as explain the lore that I've made for her, and that she's slowly given herself. So let's just jump right into it, starting with the build process. Now, plastic card is not something I use a lot. In fact, the first time I ever used it was on this project. The body was sent to me from my good friend Silverband, and as soon as I had it, it was cut down to a more appropriate size. This sadly left her with no running board. The previous one was basically useless at this point. So in came the plastic card. I cut a piece to not only fit the cab, but the boiler too, then trimming it down to fit a pair of buffer beams. These are the same buffer beams that were going to go on Bruno, but I decided he should have some bigger ones anyway, so these are kind of free game. Next came a chassis, and for this, I chose probably the most complicated option, a Bachmann Bill, and realistically a Peckett would have been much easier, or maybe even just a normal DePaul pug. This was all I could find at the time though, and visually I think it works pretty great, but the modifications I had to do to the chassis were pretty substantial. The iMech, literally 80% of the front, and just a smidge before the pistons was all gone, and not a fun Dremel cut, let me tell you. Once that was removed though, the running board was test fit, and thankfully, all was flush. Ish. It took embarrassingly long to get the running board to sit flat, but I got it eventually. I had cut so much of the front area of the chassis off at this point by the time I made it to the back where the cab steps are, I just gave up. I just didn't want to deal with that anymore. So instead I rebuilt the area with some more card, kind of in an attempt to make it look like a larger cab step or maybe just, I guess, more filled in. In the end, I think it paid off a lot. For paint, I decided to go with a drab army green, specifically AS9 by Tamiya. Now, this was gonna be Percy at a time, but the army green was somewhat inspiring. It was right about here I decided to go the OC route, and instead of fitting any 6s, would fit a WD for War Department. War Department, Jesus Christ, my bad. And a number 1, since technically this is the first official personal engine to run and be made for the Loch layout. Now came smaller details and waiting for the face, so piston heads here, extra valves there, throwing in even more card to keep the running board level, but very soon the face made it to me, as well as some extra goodies from L&J Toys. A capsule milli face would temporarily complete the engine, and now for some fun, Topham is also vacationing here too. Look at his ice cream, I love this thing. Alright, back to the engine, the face was fit. She received a very light dusting of light brown paint to her chassis, and this brings us to where Athena is now. I'd still like to add more weathering, but sadly I'm still waiting on some shunner tools, so I'd like to fit those first and maybe use those as a sort of guide. And let me be the first to say this is not the cleanest job, sadly. For example, the smoke box, as you can see on one side, is slightly raised and not so flush, and that could have been the result of a number of things, maybe heat, the Dremel, sanding. Sadly, I really don't know, and hope to be a lot more careful and clean with such whenever I make a new one. For my first real custom build of an engine though, I have to say I'm quite proud of what I've done. It was cool to actually make an engine this time, instead of simply printing or repainting one. And surprisingly, not as hard as I thought it'd be. For now, however, I'd like to switch gears into her story, and that kinda goes something like this. So, like I've mentioned, the Loch layout is mine. It's literally as if I was the controller of a preservation railway. I feel like that's more fun and just easier than Sodor anyway. Athena is the first engine to be bought for it, and came from the WD, as overstock that was sold off to the railway. Like I said earlier, she gives herself a personality. When I find myself running her, she can be temperamental at times, but when my fiance does, never once, I swear to God. So I imagine she listens more to her than me, can't really blame her. and has a bit of an attitude in doing things, all of which will be done in her own way. The name Athena is even a nod to the WD she wears, as Athena is a goddess of war. But also it's sort of ironic. She's a tiny 040 with a goddess's name. It's just oddly fitting. At least to me it is. And currently she helps to not only restore this line, but also runs mock goods and passenger services. Literally just whatever you throw at her. She'll do it her way, but she will do it. And that's pretty much all there is to know about Athena. With any luck, she won't be alone for too long, and even more so, hopefully it inspires you guys to try something similar. This may seem daunting, it was for me at first. I went through a process of making edits, just being way too anxious about this thing. But in the end, and during the entire process, really just had an engine I was nothing but proud of, and that stands even now. There are definitely some parts I could have done better on, and hopefully will do that in the next attempt. But for a first try, and being my first real engine that's, I guess, mine, I guess technically you can count Isabella, but I think this one's a bit more intricate. At the end of the day, I'm just happy with this result. And now that I've bored you with all of that, let's get into some running footage.
Either subscribe, donate, or get the fuck out.